Hey, welcome back to the FLŌ TRIBE podcast, where I get to interview the movers, breathers, teachers, and healers of the world. So I'm really excited about this one, guys. I get to talk to a very close friend of mine, Max Powers. So Max and I have known each other for probably over 5 years at this point, and this conversation, warning, is all about martial arts. So Max is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's also a personal trainer who specializes in unconventional training methods, such as kettlebells, steel maces, Indian clubs, and all kinds of different movement styles. He's a brilliant mover, he's a brilliant martial artist, but more importantly, he's an awesome human being. I love this conversation. I'm pretty sure you will too. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Max Powers. So Max Powers, thank you so much for being here, brother. It's been a long time. We've been wanting to do this. I'm happy we can finally do it. So why don't we start off by having you tell us, or tell everyone who you are, what you do, and what you're all about.
Well, I'm simply put, I'm a personal trainer. I'm a martial artist. Uh, I'm a human. Uh, I'm alive. But I just to come back on the first thing I said, I'm a personal trainer. That's like my job. But I believe I'm a little bit more than a personal trainer in the sense that I like to talk about other stuff than just the physical body or physical health. I'm a martial artist, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, more specifically, but I enjoy all martial arts, also striking and stuff. With you, we did some striking in the past. Um, yeah, I'm a human as well, like I said, and I try to think about the deep questions of life. Why are we here? And what does it all mean? What's up with life after death or whatever? So maybe that's my human side. And that's a little bit about me. Like if you want to have a more precise parkour of my uh, biography, I used to play soccer, which was my first sport, and I identify a lot with movement and sports and fitness because it's a big part of my being. And soccer was my first sport. Then I went to American football. I played American football all the way to university. I unfortunately had a knee injury, and then after I got my surgery, I didn't end up continuing a much longer football. So I left football and then I jumped into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And around the same time that I jumped into Jiu Jitsu after my football career in a university, I started to train people as well. So at the same time that I started to practice Jiu Jitsu, I also started to enjoy kettlebells a lot and I would say unconventional training. So steel mace, if anybody knows what steel mace, it's like a big piece of steel with a heavy weight on top. So I enjoyed play with that, the gymnastic rings, and other how could I say, like, awkward fitness tools. I like to play with those, and yeah, I enjoy philosophy, psychology. I don't know what else to say about me, but that's a little bit.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's plenty. And it's funny because I was thinking the other day about how we first connected, and it was actually a lot about what you're just talking about. So first of all, I remember we were both working in the same gym,
Yeah.
and you walked in, and the first thing I noticed was your calves. I swear to God, because I find like you can tell if someone's like mad fit if their legs are solid. You know what I mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
because I knew you were a trainer, so obviously when you're in a new gym, the first thing you do is size up the other trainers and like who are
Yeah,
these
yeah.
guys and what's going on there. And I just remember seeing your calves and be like, oh shit, this guy's for real. And then the second thing was you did this crazy warm up with the clubs, right? You
Uh-huh.
had like those clubs and you had this whole warm up routine. I was like, damn, that's dope. And I just remember right away thinking I got to connect with this guy because it
Hmm.
was unique, right? Like whenever you see someone doing something different like that, there's, for me anyway, that draws me to them because it's like this guy thinks differently. He has a different
Yeah.
perspective on fitness. You had this whole really crazy warm up routine. And then I think we crossed paths in the little locker room situation that they had. And
Yeah.
we just started talking and I mentioned martial arts and you said, yeah, I do jujitsu. I said, I do Muay Thai. And then we started talking about breathing and we started talking about flow and we started talking
Yeah.
about, I had just read the book, The Rise of Superman,
Uh-huh.
and I brought that up and we just really connected on that level. So right away, for me, that's not, you'd think that happens more often, but it really doesn't in the fitness world. I think most trainers sit around talking about glutes and hamstrings
Yeah.
and stuff and that's fine. I mean, that's the business, but to be able to connect with another human being on things like breathing and flow and another level of fitness,
Mhm.
really, right? Mental fitness, spiritual
Yeah.
fitness, emotional fitness. I think that's why we connected so quickly, because we share not only a passion for training and martial arts, but also that other side of things. And so, and I think that's such an important part of it, right? As trainers, we are responsible for a person's health. And so the more we can bring to the table, whether it's, their physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health, the more successful we can help them become, right?
Yeah. Fully agree. And I think
So,
that
yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say that I think that the word that keeps ringing into my mind is the holistic side of fitness, or
Yeah.
the complete global fitness. And I always like to relate it back to martial art, because that's another strong point where we connected, is that when you do martial art, you obviously have to use your body, right? Because you're striking or you're grappling, but you have to use your mind, because most of the time it's a chess match between you and your opponent. So there's a mental aspect, and the third aspect, which I could call like spiritual or even just emotional, the guy's trying to hurt you, right? So there's a stress, and the control of breath and flow state is a big part of martial art. And I think another reason why we connected on that. And we also understood that, yeah, it's fun to just fight, but we have to separate sometimes. You have to separate. How do you breathe when you fight? How do you move your feet when you fight? How do you punch the bag or the pads when you fight? And separate each of those parts. And I really like the fact that I was into breathing and you were too, and you had some pieces of knowledge that I didn't, and we sort of completed. I think from our meeting, or from that talk, both of us had a better understanding of not only breathing for martial art, but just breathing in general, and the importance of it. And
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because and I think it almost talks a little bit about our personalities, is that you come from that grappling background and I came from that striking background. And though they're both martial arts, they're extremely different, right?
yeah,
The way you approach it is so different. And breathing is different, right? Even the breathing involved, like if I think, and something you turned me on to was like, and I think you had taken this from the Gracies probably, because everything comes from them.
yeah,
Um, but you had talked about how in jujitsu, you have to learn how to breathe with different parts of your body, and how, for example, if I have a 200-pound man on top of my chest, it's going to be hard to breathe with my chest.
yeah,
So I got to learn how to breathe out of my back. I got to learn how to breathe out of my ribs on the sides. Right. And I was like, how does that work? I don't understand. But then you realize like the lungs can expand in all those different directions. And
mhm,
if you train yourself, you can learn how to do that. So suddenly that weight on your chest is much less of a big deal, because you can still breathe from these other parts. Right. And there was also the idea that, like, for example, in Muay Thai, I have to kind of create space if I want to breathe, right? If I'm
uh,
engaged in battle and I need to breathe and I need to recover, I need to create that space. As we're in jujitsu, it can also be just having a really good grip on someone, controlling the situation and giving
mm,
yourself that space. Even if the person's on top of you, you can
yeah,
create that time, that space to kind of to think, to breathe, to plan your next move, as long as you
mhm,
have that body control, right?
yeah,
So though they're both martial arts, it's just cool that the approach is so different.
mhm,
But in the end, it's like you said, in both situations, that person, they're trying to hurt you. So
yeah,
that just brings on a whole other level of stress that I don't think exists really in other sports,
yeah,
right? Because like in a tennis match, yeah, okay, I might lose this tennis match, but my body is not necessarily in danger the way that it
yeah.
is in a martial arts situation, right?
Yeah, like maximum you'll feel some soreness in your arm, but you won't never necessarily have a bruise or a sore neck from someone trying to choke you out, right? So the
Or getting choked out completely.
completely passing out. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
stakes are just different. Even if, we're like human beings, civilized human beings, like at the gym, whether it be Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu, like nobody's gonna kill you for real. But just the scenario of the martial arts movement brings about a certain stress, and elevates the importance of breathing, because it's important to breathe as well when you do your tennis match or you're running your marathon, obviously. But when you have that physical stress and emotional stress, we're like, yo, this guy is trying to, kick my ass. Uh, we tend to go into panic mode much faster, right? And just start to gasp for air much faster. Even if we're not really winded, like our body's still able to get oxygen. Just the fact that the guy is in our bubble or trying to get in our bubble, uh, it plays tricks with our mind and then eventually the body or our breathing patterns.
Yeah, and the other thing also that struck me about you with jujitsu, and I've seen this with a few guys before, is that you came to jujitsu just loaded with muscle, right? Strong dude, probably, always killed it in the gym, killed it on the football field. You were always the strongest, biggest, fastest, whatever. And then you get into jujitsu and you get schooled, probably by guys like half your size.
Yeah,
Some like math nerd off in the corner is choking you out, and you're
it's an
like, what
experience.
is going on right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And I've had the same thing happen in Muay Thai, where someone who you don't think should be that fast and hit that hard can really surprise you. Same way that I've gone up against guys twice my size and schooled them just because my
Mhm,
skill level was so much stronger. And I think that's one thing about martial arts that I absolutely love is if you invest the time into technique, into
mhm,
understanding that chess match, you can
100%.
have an advantage despite a size difference, or the opposite, having that size difference and realizing it doesn't actually matter. And
Yeah.
now no matter how strong I am, if I don't learn this technique, I'm never going to be able to handle these guys. Right? So
Mhm.
what was that journey like for you to go from, the typical football player, big muscle jock guy, to now a jiu-jitsu black belt, which I think was, a pretty crazy journey for someone who comes from that type of background.
I think the first word that comes to mind is humbleness, and I must say that if I go back a little bit more into like my history and stuff, um, it's really jujitsu that made me like I don't want to use the word ascend or evolve, but made me transform myself into a more complete human being.
I think evolve's a good word.
Simply
Ascension might be a little much,
that's a
but
little
I
much.
think I think evolve is a good word.
So let's keep it at evolve
Yes, let's stick to
because
evolve.
when I started, like you mentioned, when I used to play football, I used to think I was the shit, man. I used to
Yeah.
like I was bigger than I am now. I'm roughly 200 pounds, and I used to think not only in the football field, like in life. I used
Yeah.
to believe that nobody can fuck with me. I'm the biggest guy. I'm the strong guy. You know, which is it was a complete delusion. And then when I came to and I mean I just want to add that even with my knee injury that I mentioned earlier, even that didn't humble me the right way in the sense that, okay, you're a strong athlete, but you are breakable, right? You could break your knee. And there is other stuff than the physical realm or the physical ability or not the end all be all. So you need to work on your mind, go to school and just try to evolve that way as well. So what I was trying to say that is that the injury should have humbled me a little bit, but what humbled me the most was the example you gave, where I have a 140-pound guy that looks like a nerd that's not only like kicking my ass, but like taking his sweet ass time. You know what I mean? Like he's sitting on you, and you think you could bench 140 pounds, right? But the way he angled his body, you cannot. You have to stay on the ground, and he dictates the pace. And it was really humbling, especially coming from a background of athletics, where I was sure that okay, I'm university level athlete, I'm better than most, like from the get go. And then this is especially that first encounter that I remember with the jujitsu master in my first or second class. I was like, yeah, like you complete delusion. And I don't know if it's from that day necessarily, but I think from around this moment, that's almost been my focus is to remove the illusions as much as possible, whether it be from the fitness realm, like how recently everybody understood that that fat is not the real culprit. Sugar is a bit more important, in the nutrition
Of course,
fitness
yeah.
part, and all other myths and myth and other stuff that's maybe in the mainstream. I wouldn't say from that point, but that around that time when I started jiu-jitsu, I was like, yeah, let's try to dive deeper into things and really see what it is. Not, the smoke in the mirror, just what's the deep thing, And I think jujitsu is a big part. There's a big part of my knowledge that I acquired during jujitsu, and it's really weird because it feels like meditation to me, in a sense that I'm fighting, but my mind is like at peace, especially if I'm fighting somebody that's not as good as me or really killing me, but somebody that just matches my skill level, or I'm I'm exerting myself in a sense that I have to be focused, but at the same time I'm not being smothered. I,
Yeah.
I find myself so much at peace in a fight that for some reason I feel I gain knowledge, like not necessarily pure words, but I feel like I understand life or different situations through the fight. So it's hard to.
100%. And I think what you learn, I mean, we could go, well, let's go on forever about martial arts because that's what we do. Um, so I think for me, it was very similar. So when I started Muay Thai, it was just to get in shape. That was the only reason. You could do that, in some places of the world, if you show up in a Muay Thai gym, you better expect to fight. But, in Montreal, you can go to a Muay Thai gym, have a great workout, hit some bags, hit some pads, never get touched, go home, you're all good, right? And for me at first, that's all it was a great way to get in shape. But then I'm like, hey, I actually want to learn this thing. I want to learn how this works. I want to learn how to fight. And then I started sparring and all that. And that's extremely humbling, right? Because also I was a really good athlete. Most sports I tried as a kid, boom, I got it. Baseball, soccer, football, you name it, I was a decent athlete. But this was different, right? Because the intentions behind the movement are so different. And I remember my very first sparring session, I got hit. I was like, oh, that's different than any other sport I've done before because it
Mhm.
hurts. Even getting hit in football is not the same because that
No.
person is trying to stop you from running. They're not necessarily pinpointing your liver or, you know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah,
like,
like
it's just,
incapacitate you for
yeah.
a long time,
Yeah. And
not just.
my first teacher was a mean son of a bitch. Like he liked to hurt people. Right. And so when he saw someone come up, you're like, oh, you want to learn how to spar? Okay. Well, let me make sure you know what sparring is. And
Mhm.
he didn't do it like he wasn't trying to put me in the hospital, but he knew where to hit that wouldn't do any permanent damage, but that I would feel it for a while. Right.
Mhm.
And what that does to your ego, especially as a good athlete, as someone who considers themselves good at anything, really, it's just like, oh my God, that is so humbling. Much like for you to get choked out by
Yeah.
someone who is half your size or just getting choked out at all. I
Mhm.
think like my experiences with jujitsu, not as many as yours, but I've had enough that there are moments where you're in a position, you're like, I would be dead right now. Like I
Yeah.
have no idea. At least in Muay Thai, like you can kind of run away if you want to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like I could turn around and run away if we're like striking.
Yeah.
But in jujitsu, with someone on top of
It
you,
holds you.
and they're holding you and there's no escape. Like there is no way I can get out of this. Like nothing I'm doing other maybe than if I start elbowing them in the face or
Yeah.
something crazy like MMA style. But if by the rules of jujitsu, or even a really good jujitsu fighter would know how to prevent those elbows too,
Yeah.
And that is just the most humbling, and I think, and I've seen guys get very frustrated and they don't usually last in jujitsu because of
Mhm.
that. But then the ones that are willing, if you're willing to put your ego to the side and recognize that, hey, if I apply myself and learn these techniques, I'll be the one on top and I'll be the one applying that kind of pressure, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. It dissolves your ego so quickly, but in such a good way.
Yeah.
Like it's so nice to have that
Mhm.
because I think we don't realize how much our ego weighs us down sometimes and how involved it is in our decision making in a bad way,
Mhm.
right? It's such a it's a source of fear. Like I
Mhm.
would do this, but then I might look stupid, so I'm not going to do it. Although I
Yeah.
really would have enjoyed doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think bringing that same approach and being taught, and it's not, you don't even have to try. Like if you do martial arts long enough, it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Like knowing you and knowing a lot of people in that world, like you're some of the most peaceful people I've ever met,
Mhm.
right? Like both of us, like that's where we connect. We don't connect on the fact that we
You
don't
can.
walk around the streets threatening people, like it's the
Yeah.
opposite. It's the
Uh,
opposite.
I'm not sure where I heard that, but there's like a saying from the Greek philosopher somewhere that like a weak man or a harmless man is not fully a man or something like that. I don't remember the saying, unfortunately. But the idea is that it's to come back also to the book that you mentioned before, Peaceful Warrior. It's
Yeah.
like there's a part of being truly at peace comes from the fact that if you need to defend yourself, you can. So the fact that like I practice my fitness, I also practice my martial arts skills. It really helps me to be fully peaceful in general, but also in a heated discussion or argument, I could keep my point, without necessarily resorting to violence, because I know that if it goes out of hand and the guy decides to back kick me, I could block it and whatever, and at least defend myself, not necessarily hurt the guy. But I think it transcends the sport. When you have that dissolved ego that you mentioned before. That's what I like the most, and that's why I respect all martial artists, whether it be my jujitsu friends or maybe some Muay Thai people. Is that every day we go in the gym to remove the bullshit, you know? Like everybody has a part of their ego that tells them that we're the best, you know, that we're able to do this, we're able to do that. But then you go in the gym and you check it every day. You check it at the door, you know, you check your ego at the door, you fight, you practice, and then it's like almost the realest life, you know, like physical altercation, like to some extent, there is nothing more real than the concrete, you know, than the physical part of it, even if we could go into philosophy and stuff. But I really love all martial artists take the time weekly, daily to, you know, confront themselves and dissolve the ego on a regular basis. And I also mentioned before that when we were talking about the breathing, because we're dealing with a stressful situation and a make believe life and death scenario, there is definitely some spiritual implication with that, you know, because you're dealing with the fact that the guy could almost choke you out, almost break your arm, almost kick your head off. That's when, you know, there's a spiritual growth on top of just mental and physical gains. That's why, you know, martial art is shit.
Yeah, and something I want to come back to is you and I had the chance to teach a few self-defense workshops together, and um, something you said earlier. It's not that, you know, when you teach someone self-defense, I think especially women who mostly are the ones who come to self-defense workshops. It's not that you're not training because chances are you're going to need it. You're training so that you know that if you need it, which probably won't happen, you know,
Mhm.
depending where you live in the world, but I think most of the people that we've had the chance to train with, those people are in safe places, they're in safe neighborhoods, they live safe lives. And it's not that you'll ever necessarily need to defend yourself, but knowing that you can just makes a huge difference in so many different situations. Just like I think, like you were saying, like if you just get into an argument with someone, just a normal verbal argument with a stranger on the street, you're much less likely to escalate that argument if you know that physically you can handle yourself, right? Because that's the evolution of the argument, right? It starts with a verbal, and then especially between two men, this usually
Yep.
goes to, you know, men, and then, you know, it's verbal, and then it's heated, and then maybe one guy pushes the other guy, and then next thing you know, it's the
Mhm.
most, you know, usually a really ridiculous looking fight ensues after
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And a lot of
And I
times,
love, just want to finish this. I love that you said that, you know, if the guy tries to spinning back kick me, I know what to do. I'm like, bro, that's probably not the most likely thing that's going to happen. You know, you're not, unless you're like talking to George St. Pierre, but
yeah,
it's more the guy's going to try to push you, or the guy's going to try to grab you, and I think that's where just knowing that, you know, and if that person doesn't know how to fight, it's over, you
yeah.
know, and that's the thing. And that's where training comes in. You know, I think there's so many people who, and I've seen a lot of people and come into the gym who've been in street fights who think, you know, they're tough. And yeah, and they are tough. They can take a hit, they can hit. But when you go up against someone with really good technique, it's just not the same game.
Mhm.
You know, it's just not, because mentally, you know what that person's going to do. You've done it a million times. That person's going on instincts that aren't trained, as where
Yeah,
your instincts are highly trained,
yeah.
right? And I think that's the difference. And I think knowing what to do just gives you a sense of peace, so that even when you're arguing, it's all good. You know,
Yeah,
let's de-escalate this. I don't want to fight you. I
yeah.
do that all day, man. I'm tired of fighting. Let's just
Mhm.
talk. Let's talk this out. Let's figure this out. So
Mhm.
I honestly think of martial arts as the anti-violence,
Yeah,
right? The violence happens in training. It happens in the gym. It happens within people. It's consensual violence that we are involved in, so that when the opportunity for real violence comes up, you're able to de-escalate that, and you're able to peacefully, I mean, and if it doesn't, then at least you know what to do. But I'd say it's much less likely that if one of those two people is a really good martial artist, chances are that fight's never even going to happen,
yeah,
because you actually know how to deal with that situation. You agree with that?
yeah. 100%. Just because most of the time it's never worth it to go to that physical end, you know. And a lot of time when we go into extreme scenarios where somebody takes a gun and kills somebody or a weapon of some sort, it's because that person can't defend themselves and they're so scared for their life that they go like 3,000 level up, you know, and they skip just talking and they go to shooting, and that's where there's like irrational violence that happens, you know, simply because people are not at peace, whether it be from the dissolved ego, their ego is too big or too small, they overreact, right? But if you practice every day dissolving the ego on a regular basis, we tend not to attract problems, right? And even if we talk about like the argumentation example that we had before, there's a different posture that a martial artist has, right? Or even if it's just walking in the street and somebody is decently fit and does a little bit of martial art, they don't walk like the person that the thief wants to steal from. But if you walk a little bit more upright, the thief is never going to come see you. So if people dive into self-defense just a little bit, so it affects their posture and their aura, whatever that means, again, there's less and less chance for altercation to happen, you know? And we
Yeah.
were also talking about technique and being trained and stuff like that. That's where the flow states that we also often talk about has to come in, where we have to train ourselves to go into that zone, and where we practice a technique so much that we don't need to think about it. You know, if the opening is there, we use it.
Yeah, and that's what flow is, right? And yeah, we could definitely dive into flow at this point. So flow, what blew my mind when I started doing all this research on flow, and it comes up in a lot of the books, is this concept that when you're in flow, the part of your brain that's responsible for thinking turns off. It shuts down completely, and you
Mhm.
go into a state of hypofrontality. And it's the same state that you can reach through meditation, right? A state of like perfect mindfulness where you're no longer using thought. And I think that's what flow is. It's that you've trained whatever skill you do, whether you're a musician, you're a painter, you're a martial artist, whatever skill you do, once you reach that level where you no longer have to think about it, you can just act, then
Mhm.
you're creating the opportunity for flow, right? So in jujitsu, you know, there will be moments where you're kind of just sitting there and you're thinking and you're trying to plan your next moves. But then at some point that scramble happens. And next thing you
Yeah,
know, you pull something off. You didn't have time to think.
yeah,
You know, especially
reflex.
at that black belt level, there's no time to think, man. These guys are all killers.
Yeah,
Right. And so you have to be able, same thing. If there's a punch coming at my face, I'm not like, huh, okay, there's this punch coming. I better do this. No, man, it's got to be instinct or it's coming or it's going to hit me.
yeah,
You know, and even with amazing instincts, you're still going to get hit. But yeah, I think flow, and that's where I think what separates the great from the good is that willingness to train, that willingness to put in the extra
yeah.
work,
Hmm.
to train those instincts, right? Because if you're still not at the instinct level, you will never be great. You will never have that power of flow on your side because you know anybody can hit a bag, anybody can hit pads, anybody can spar against someone who's like half this, you know, half their caliber. But when you go up against that person who's just that little bit better than you,
Yeah,
that's the best opportunity for flow is when you're challenged and you know, like, hey, if I don't give everything I have with this person, I'm done. So
yeah.
then you got to let go and be like, okay, stress, I feel you, but we got this. Right. And so what was it like for you as you grew in the martial arts world, as you know, the belts kept going up and up? Is there a moment that you remember going up against someone and feeling like, whoa, I didn't think I could hold my own here, but I just did. And that's when you probably knew like I got this, not in the way that I'm the best, but in the way that okay, I feel it now. I feel like all the work that I've been doing, it's starting to pay off because where this person used to give me a really hard time, all of a sudden it's like, haha, my turn, you know?
Uh,
Do you remember that? Is there a moment that you remember or a couple moments?
I wouldn't say I remember an exact moment or an exact person that, okay, I was a white belt or a lower belt and I fought them, had a hard time, and then some time passed and then I actually beat them. But I remember times where I thought I was doing the same mediocre level, but then after a round, you know, after 5 minutes of sparring, slap and bump with my buddy or my training partner, and be like, yeah, like he would tell me, you're getting better, right? You're in a sense that I thought I was gonna get you in that trap or in that technique, and then you saw it, you know, a second before. But it was a lot of it happened as I mean, that's my experience. It happens in flow, and when we say flow, we mean high pro frontality, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know when it happened during my jujitsu journey, but I forced myself to stop thinking in a sense that we fight, the guy takes my arm, and I just let my instinct go, you know. And I couldn't tell you at which belt or what time it happened, but I would just like try and be okay with the fact that I would get trapped sometime, but try to just go with the guy, you know. If someone pulls me, I would push into them. And then with that, the fact that I'm accelerating his pull gives me an edge because I'm now the dancing leader, or because I really like to comparer
Compare.
to compare. Sorry,
Yeah,
brain
it's all
fart.
good.
To
All good.
to compare fighting with dancing, and whether it's be dancing or fighting, there's always someone that needs to lead
Mhm.
the dance or the fight for it to function properly, right? And if you're fighting, you want to be the leader, that because most of the time it is you're not getting punched in the face.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I actually on this podcast interviewed a dancer, and we talked about this quite a bit. The difference between the similarities and differences between martial arts and dance. The movements are very similar. The way
Hmm.
we use our bodies are very similar. I'd say the difference though is in dance, if there's a leader and then there's the follower, but in dance the follower has to be the follower, right? If they both try to be the leader, it's not going to work. The
Hmm.
dance won't work. As we're in martial arts, you're both fighting to be the
Opposite.
leader. It's
Yep.
the opposite, right? You never want to be the one who's being led,
Hmm.
right? You have to have, or sometimes you can pretend, right? And that's
Yeah.
like part of the setup is, and I think that for me is when, when I was in white belt classes, like everyone's just doing the best they can to stay alive, right? You're just rolling around trying
Hmm.
to remember how to do a freaking armbar and like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it was more when I started training a lot of the pro MMA fighters, and these guys were all brown belts, black belts, and I got to roll with them. And so for me, it was just such an amazing learning opportunity because they knew their skill level was much greater than mine. So they weren't trying to hurt me. They were just trying to roll with me so that I could learn. And what I recognized was that I thought I was defending this one thing, but what they were actually doing was setting up something to counter the counter of my counter. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's just, and you see it in Muay Thai also, where you'll use one technique to set up something else, but it happens so much faster. It's a much quicker
Hmm.
reaction type sport. As where in jujitsu, you think you're doing okay, like, haha, you're trying this, but you're not going to get me. And the next thing you know, it's like, wait, what? Like
Hmm.
everything just flips upside down. And next thing you know, and then you realize, like, oh, this guy was 3 moves ahead of me. He knew and it's like a chess match. It's exactly
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
Great chess players, they know what you're going to do 4, 5, 6 moves ahead, right? And I think
Yep.
in jujitsu, it's very similar in the sense that, someone at that level, they're setting this up to then counter this to then do this, as
Hmm.
where you think you're just defending this one thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think also to come back to your question, where did I feel my evolution in a way in jujitsu? It was actually around purple belt where I started to implement traps,
Yeah.
implement like, okay, I'm gonna give you my arm. So you try to do your arm bar. And because I know you're not that good, or I have confidence that I'm able to react at the right time, as you're doing the technique to do the arm lock, I'm doing something else. And that's when I really start to change the fight into a play. When I'm setting up those tricks, I'm play fighting, even if the other person is probably fighting me for real. I'm now play fighting, and that's the meditation I think that I was mentioning before, is when I could take the energy, the emotion, the aggression of a fight, and then turn it into meditation or play in my mind, or in reality at the same time.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened for me was when because I've always been a very nervous, anxious person, and the idea of fighting always made me super nervous. Like I never got into street fights. Like I had friends who'd go to bars and get into fights. I couldn't handle it. Like that nervous energy just destroyed me. So sparring in the beginning was really hard for me. Like I had to get over that. And I think it wasn't until I did a seminar with crew Mark Delagrate, amazing, amazing Muay Thai teacher out of Boston, Sit Yo Tong in Boston. And he came to give us a seminar. He was the trainer for Patrick Cote in The Ultimate Fighter when Patrick Cote was in that. And he came in with his student Neil. I think Neil was his name, pretty sure. And they gave this amazing, amazing seminar, learned some amazing techniques. And then at the end, he's like, hey, by the way, my student is willing to do some light sparring with any of you guys if you're willing to do that. And we got in the ring. And at the time, I was like, I was decent. I was probably one of the best guys in my gym, right? I was teaching the beginners class. I felt really good. And even in sparring, I could hold my own against most of the people in the gym. So I'm thinking, all right, this should be fun. I got schooled so badly, but in a way that was so playful. Like
Hmm.
this guy never actually hit me. I just remember moving and all of a sudden he did something with his hands. And next thing I know, his shin is leaning on my neck, but he didn't actually hit me. Like he just
Just like,
he just placed it there and then brought it back. And dude, I would have rather get hit. Like honestly, like I'm like, what now? Like my leg doesn't even go up that high. I was just like, first of all, flexibility on point, right? But then the second thing is he did this other thing, and then he tripped me, but he caught me in the trip and laid me down on the canvas in the ring
Softly, like, yeah.
like a princess. And I'm just like, okay, but he was just playing with me.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, we're just having fun. And meanwhile, I'm all like thinking I'm
Yeah,
going to show
trying.
this guy what I got. And meanwhile, he was like 5 moves ahead of me every
Yeah.
time. And I
Makes me
think that day, that was what, 15 years ago. And I still remember, like, I have
clearly. Yeah.
plenty of sparring sessions that I don't remember, but that one, and I spoke to him afterwards, and he's like, it's a game, man. It's all a game. And you have to first of all, find partners that are willing to play, right? Like, sparring should be fun. That's where
Yeah.
you explore. That's where, now, obviously, as the fight gets closer, the intensity has to go up. But have these sessions where you don't put pads on, you just move and you play, because that's where you're going to learn. Without
Yeah.
that stress, you take away that stress, now we can flow. And
Yeah.
then I started, and a bunch of us who were at that seminar that day, we got turned on to that idea together. And we just
Mhm.
started doing that. And I remember friends that I could spar with for 15, 20-minute rounds without stopping, because
Yeah.
we were never in danger. We were never going hard. But the techniques that came out of those sessions were some of the best things I could use in real
Mhm.
sparring sessions, you know? So I'm guessing that's similar in jiu-jitsu, where there's a moment where if you have a really good training partner and you're both pretty equally matched, you can just flow in a way
Exactly.
that, like, and he's just like, okay, you got me, but let's just keep going right away. It's like, you don't even need to tap. It's like, I
Yeah.
know I have this technique, so I'm going to let go so that we can just keep flowing. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah, it makes me think of two things. The first thing is that most of the advanced class, that's how we warm up. We do a flow session, like a 5-minute roll, where you get into position, but you never see the guy, and you just get the body loose in the sense that the guy gets you in an armbar, but then you let him get out of it, and then that creates enough of a body heat that you're finally warmed up. But also, I remember stories that I've heard about the Gracies, where if someone would try to showboat their physical or even martial arts skills, they would get like the best jiu-jitsu guy to fight him, just like you said, like 15, 20-minute rounds, and really smash the guy super hard. And then as soon as he gets ready to tap for the choke, well, he removes the choke before the guy has the chance to tap, and then he takes the arm and then cranks the arm before the guy has chance to tap the arm, remove, and then goes to the knees, and just keep on like pseudo submitting the guy on and on and on and on until the guy verbally like taps, like, I can't take this anymore. And even if there's no submission that actually happened, it was almost always close. So and just to come back to what you were saying before, like, these words, they need to be thrown in the same sentence, right? Play, learning, meditation, flow. Like, to come back to the story of the guy that laid you down like a princess, the play behind it really permits the body, the brain, to learn, right? And a lot of time in fitness, in martial art as well, maybe even more, people think they need to grind, to be good at something. They need to grind and push hard and then sweat and then vomit on the ground because they go so hard. But if they play, instead of doing 5 minutes super intense round, maybe they do 15 minutes play round, and they get much more advanced. And you see it, the top guys in the UFC, they make it look easy. The guys that are really winning, they're not forcing stuff, they're playing. They're setting traps and they're staying loose. And I think that's a concept I would really want people to learn more about fitness and martial art, that yes, we need to go hard, but it's the balance, right? We need to lay back and play sometimes. It can't always be fight.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
that level of play, and I think this comes back to flow also, is that level of play, to reach that level, requires a huge amount of effort in training, right? So for me to be able to lay, which I was eventually able to, I was the one laying people down like princesses. But that took years and years of practice to get to a level where I'm able to do that. Right. And that's the thing, is I think the level of play, once you're able to play in sparring, is once you feel confident enough in your abilities to be able to relax. Same thing in jujitsu. Like, if you go in and you have no idea how to do jujitsu, I don't care how playful you are, you're getting tapped fast because you have
yeah,
no idea what's coming. You don't know what's happening. You have no clue. This guy has your arm. You're going to maybe try to use strength because that's all you know how to do. But you realize very quickly that just gets you really tired really fast. And then
yeah,
you're just lying there in a pile of sweat, and
yeah.
you can't do much after that. And it reminds me of a jujitsu class that was happening in the same gym that I was teaching Muay Thai. And I forget who was teaching, but I think it was like a blue belt, purple belt class, something like that. It wasn't white belts. And the guy just yelled, "Stop." It's like, what is wrong with you people? And he points to these two guys, for example. He uses an example. He's like, look, for the past 4 minutes, this guy's been defending an armbar. Like, he's been defending this armbar for 4
Yeah.
minutes. Do you know how many different positions and techniques you could have practiced in those 4 minutes? This isn't a competition. We're all on the same team. He has the armbar. Let it go, bro. You know what I mean?
Just
Like, tap it, keep flowing, try something else. Or ask him to do it again, to show you how to get out of it. But don't just sit there for 4 minutes and let your ego prevent you from learning.
Yeah.
Right. And I
100%.
think that's such an important lesson, is that as soon as you allow the ego to take over, you're preventing an opportunity for learning. It's like, hey, he got you, man. Just let it go and keep moving, you know? And I think, to me, I was like, see, I still remember things like that, because it was such an important thing. He's like, if you watch the black belt classes, that's all they do, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you got me, sweet. Let's keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that applies to so many things in life, right? Our ego prevents us from learning, because we're not willing to accept defeat. We're not willing to accept failure, when failure is one of the best opportunities to learn.
Yeah.
You know, and especially in the MMA world, you see it. A lot of fighters, when they lose, let's say for the first time, two things happen. One, they never win again, because the loss affects their ego too much, or they come back twice as strong.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's those guys that are able to say, okay, let's learn from this opportunity and come back stronger. And I think that you see it in a lot of sports, where it takes that beating, it takes that defeat to, first of all, squash the ego down a little bit, realize like you're not the top of the, you're not the top of the chain anymore. And it gives you an opportunity to just check yourself too. Like, okay, that happened. Now what? How am I going to handle this? You know?
And it brings more awareness to the actual thing, right? That failure is possible, and that we need to be aware of this and that to prevent it from happening, because nobody likes to lose, you know. There's a saying from Carlos Gracie, which is one of the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He says, in Jiu-Jitsu, you either win or you learn, right? Because every time you lost, you lose. Sorry, that's where you learn. And it's so funny that, because I mentioned how sometimes I do Jiu-Jitsu, it feels like meditation to me, but doesn't happen as often now. But when I get submitted, it's almost as if my brain, I get submitted in my armbar and then I tap. As soon as the guy lets go of my arm, I feel there's a process in my brain where I'm sort of pressing rewind. I try to go back, like as soon, and it's not a conscious process. It's just like, because my arm was almost be broken, my body wants to keep itself safe. So as soon as the guy lets go of my arm, for some reason, and I can't explain you why, it's almost as if my brain goes back in time to try and see where I made my mistake. And because I have that rewind moment, I'm learning something, in the failure. So then again, that failure is not a true loss. It's a learning opportunity.
Yeah, and you see it in a lot of sports. Like, if you look at, I've been watching a lot of football this year, and if you look at football, the greatest players, like the best quarterbacks and the best and the best defensive players, when they lose, they immediately go to the film room. They immediately want to watch that game again. It's not like, oh, damn, I lost. It's like, okay, that cannot happen again. Like, you have to have that mentality where, if I lost, it's because whatever that defense was throwing at me, I wasn't ready for, but that won't happen again, because now they're going to go into the film room. They're going to study everything. So the next time they play that team, or if another team comes at them with the same strategy, it's like, whoa, wait, it worked once, fool me once.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you see that a lot in jiu-jitsu. You see it in Muay Thai. You see it in a lot of sports, where use those opportunities to learn and grow. And I think it's life, right? If life throws something at you that you weren't able to handle, now you have a choice, right? You can like put that in the compartment of, I have to avoid that at all costs because of the fact that it made me lose in some way. Or it could be like, I need to put myself back in that situation in order to see how can I handle it better.
Yeah, and
right?
test it again.
And I think that's where maybe we can talk about meditation for a bit. For me, meditation was something that I came into because I wanted to have a better understanding of how to deal with stress. Because stress was always a physical thing for me. It was always like, I get overwhelmed easily, anxiety and all that. And the more I started to meditate, I suddenly recognized those same things happening to me that normally would get me triggered. It's like, oh, I don't feel as triggered. I feel like I'm more capable of dealing with whatever. It's like everything slows down. Right. And I think meditation, when you do it regularly, it's not like you meditate once and suddenly you're like, you
Hmm.
know, but it's more
Yeah.
you do it regularly, and suddenly the breath is the ability that you can use the breath to slow things down, whether it's in jiu-jitsu, whether it's in life,
Yeah.
whatever. It's
Uh-huh.
just such an amazing tool to slow things down. So what do you think jiu-jitsu and meditation kind of came together with you? Is that what maybe turned you on to the idea of breath and meditation, or was there something else in your life that you feel was kind of drove you in that direction?
I would definitely say that the jujitsu was the inspiration somewhere, like and also like as a kid I used to do karate, so just martial art in general, and just the martial art in general, whether the karate or jujitsu, there's always, especially if in the traditional martial art, there's always an association with meditation, and I personally have had my best meditation right after a jujitsu class, especially if I fight like 5 6 black belt. Let's say I have no lower belts, just top guys, round after round after round. My body's dead, my mind is like overwhelmed by thinking and staying sharp the whole those 2 rounds. And then we bow, we finish the class. I go sit, I meditate. Best meditation ever. Even if there's a second class in the room, a lot of noise. I even hear people talking about, look, Max is doing his funny meditation, and I'm sitting there and I feel so much at peace. And it's, how you said just before that you can't just meditate once and expect results. It's because what I understand from meditation is we sit, we breathe, and we try to observe our ego, right? We try to separate ourselves from our ego, and we try to observe the ego's tendency to be too harsh or unrealistic in its ses attentes,
Expectations.
in expectations, right? So then, because we're being the observer from our meditation, and we practice that, and we spend more time in the observer seat versus the driver seat, whenever there's a situation, altercation, or moment where meditation could apply, we have a reference point of the observer. So when the stress comes in, we're able to, with the breath, because we always associate meditation with breathing, with one breath, if we're getting pretty good at it, we go into the observer seat, and we're able to see more clearly what's going on, rather than being, in front, like the driver's seat, too front, too close to the action, and we're missing everything in the peripheral, right? So I think definitely for me, jujitsu inspired meditation, mostly because in my imagination, there's the fight, but there's also always like a, pardon the example, but a Chinese guy meditating. Like martial art is that. There's two parts, There's the Chinese guy meditation, and then there's the samurai and whatever, the full action back kick and stuff. So to me, from a young age, it's always been the two together. And then as I practice jujitsu, I reconnected with this martial art that I'm doing right now. During the fight, there's a meditation, and the easiest way for me to meditate is always after physical exercise, to come back to the flow snack idea that we talked about before. And also, had a conversation with my friend, a yoga teacher, not too long ago, and he was saying that it's almost dangerous to meditate without moving.
Mm.
Like that's what yoga is. They move, they exert a little bit of energy, and then they sit lotus or savasana, and then they meditate. And I remember that we did that a lot of times when we were chilling together often. Would train, maybe sometimes just 15, 10, 20 minutes, and then sit and meditate. And it just, first, it's easier to meditate in that state, and it just felt also more beneficial than just a meditation where I just sit, and try to center the mind, or observe the mind, observe the ego. It's always
Yeah, and I think this is definitely something we can dive into. And I think what we connected with, first of all, was this idea of combining movement and breath, right? And with my experiences with it, and I've talked about these experiences extensively, and what I've come to realize is it's not just the movement, right? It's also the intention behind the movement, and it's in the intensity of the movement. Because if you like jujitsu, for example, the reason your meditation after a jujitsu session is so strong, it's because in jujitsu, you have to give 100% of your mental focus to what you're doing, right? You can't think about what's for lunch. You can't think about
mhm,
the fight you had with your girlfriend the day before. Like you have to be in that moment, especially at your level, or else it's over, right? You have to go into flow. So if you're already tapping into that neurochemistry, which is what it is, you're already shutting down the part of the brain that once you transition to the breath work and the meditation afterwards, your brain's already in the right state.
mhm,
It's like it's like you preconditioned your brain to be ready to receive the meditation, right? It's like you've already shut down those parts of the brain that normally, like if you just wake up in the morning or
Yeah.
even worse, halfway through your day on all the stuff's going on, you try to sit and meditate, it's going to take you at least 10, 15 minutes before things start to finally quiet down,
Yeah.
right? Like for me, that's it. And it's not to say you shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that it's not a good thing. Any meditation practice is better than
Yeah.
no meditation practice.
100%.
But if you really want to feel that mindfulness, if you really want to see what you can achieve with meditation, then 100% engage in something physical that's so hard that you have no choice but to give 100% of your focus to it, then transition to your meditation. And that's where you'll start unlocking these higher states of consciousness. And just a quick story, I think one of my favorite things we ever did together was when I think we did it a couple times where a bunch of us got together, each experts in our own movement field,
Yeah.
right? There was Mitch with his parkour, there was Derek with qigong, there was you with
Yeah.
kettlebells, I was doing Muay Thai, we had Vlad who was teaching us circus tricks, and we all came from these different movement backgrounds, and we just had this amazing movement session. But then we all sat together and meditated and
Yeah.
breathed together, and that was so powerful to me because we were already all on this like level of consciousness from the movement, and then to elevate that through the breath, there was just this powerful connection that forms even with people who know each other well, don't know each other, it doesn't matter. Because at that
Yeah.
point, we're almost like pure energy. You know what I mean? Like we're already in that state and we're sharing that space, mental space, physical space, spiritual space. So, so yeah, exactly what you were saying. I think, moving first to then meditate. And yoga is the most ancient form of that, right? It's like, if you do, especially a really hardcore power flow session, and then meditate after, you're going to feel amazing.
And so much so that some people that do yoga sometimes forget that yoga is the lotus, the whatever they call the up dog, down dog, whatever is preparation for the actual yoga. And sometimes people forget that if I'm not mistaken, yoga means union, right? So almost like union of the body and the mind, or union of the self and the higher self, right? So you move the body, you take consciousness of the body, and you sit it, and you try to take consciousness of the mind, and you try to connect with the mind, And
Yeah, which is funny because like how many times have you been in a yoga class and the second the movement component's over, people are rolling up their mats and out, right? And they're missing out on the best part, right? And then you see the few who actually stick around for 5,
yeah,
10 extra minutes to breathe and to
mm-hmm.
just let it absorb because you're kind of defeating the purpose,
Yeah,
right? Okay, you moved, great, but now let it sink in, let it connect, right?
uh-huh. Yeah, but sometimes people are looking for the quick fix, right? Instead of diving deeper into what is yoga, what it's really used for, how to do it well, people just do yoga so they could say they do yoga. I mean,
Yeah, and I think in the jiu-jitsu world, you see it a lot from like there's a lot of people who get blue belts, not that many that get purple belts,
yeah,
right? Because the investment is so different. I think in most schools, if you sign up as a white belt and show up regularly, about a year later you'll get your blue belt.
yeah,
I think that's pretty,
yeah.
and it's normal. It's a good thing, but to go from blue to purple, now you got to really invest. Now you
Yeah.
got to be willing to get, to put in the time and wait. I've known
It's
guys who
also the longest belt because
yeah, I had I knew blue belts that were like it took them
4 years,
to finally
5.
get that purple. Unless they competed a lot and were just
Yeah,
tapping people left and right, and then it's like, okay, you obviously are too good for this blue belt division,
yeah,
so
yeah,
let's
yeah,
get
yeah.
you your belt. But if you take the long road, well, guess what? That's which is why I was always more impressed with people with purple belts because I'm like, nice, you invested. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like there was a sense of like good work. As we're
It's so
blue,
funny
it's like, oh, I have a blue belt. Whatever. You showed
because
up for a year. Good job. you know?
yeah, and you're just like more of a sportsman. Are you really a martial art
Yeah.
by blue belt? I don't know. By purple belt, we could start to say that you're a martial artist.
Yeah. And I think also what you were talking about, how martial arts and meditation go together. And you're thinking about the old man sitting like in a temple somewhere meditating.
Yeah.
But it's true. And that's what drew me to martial arts. But I'll be honest with you, it's also what turned me off from MMA for a long time. Because as I was training a lot of the fighters and going to a lot of the shows, and I started to recognize like a little bit of a lack of that
The
in that
tradition.
space, in that world. Like there are some amazing fighters who really connect with that tradition. And I'm not a traditional person necessarily, but it's more recognizing the humility and the willingness to be accepting of others that should come from martial arts training. But I think sometimes the ego, again, when you'd go to these obviously these competitions also, and the people in the crowd, they were there to see blood. They were there to see
Mhm.
violence. They weren't there to connect with any traditions or
Yeah,
like, or they'd even start booing when the jujitsu would start because they'd like
they don't
start,
understand. Yeah,
screaming homophobic slurs. And it was just like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so for me, it was a hard thing. And I felt like, you know what? I think there's other ways to use what I know to hopefully make the world a better place. And I think
Uh-huh.
that's where, when you start teaching kids, when you start teaching self-defense workshops, when you start, or even just using some of these principles as a trainer, right? And using movement and tap. And that's something we've always connected with, is just movement in general.
Yeah,
Like there are so many cool ways to move, whether you're doing an animal flow or you're doing unconventional training or you're doing
yeah,
martial arts. Don't hold yourself to one of those. Try them all, explore
yes.
them all, connect those pieces together. Right. So what do you remember ever, like, when did you really just start to move? Like, when was it that it was no longer a sport? It was no longer to compete. It was just because, man, movement is just such a beautiful thing. Is there something that you remember, a memory that kind of triggered that thought?
Like in my lifetime, or just let's say my adult life.
Your adult life, only because I think, like like you said, you played football, you had the big ego, then jujitsu kind of started to squash that ego, and then you were training people. But do you remember, like, when you started getting into, like, whoa, this mace thing looks interesting, Indian clubs looks interesting, walking like a bear on my four legs looks interesting. Like,
Mhm.
when did that start to emerge for you?
Well, it's definitely related to jujitsu because I remember when I was fighting my coach that was 140 pounds. I used to be in the gym with my football buddies, and I could bench 300 pounds. So I was like, "What's going on? I have the strength to lift 300 pounds. Why am I? Can I lift that guy? Because when you lift someone, you're not lifting a straight bar. You're lifting sideways, and as you're lifting, his body weight changes, and slowly, with also not only the fact that I want to push somebody off me, which is a movable object or a weird, awkward object, but also just the ground flows or the ground connection that jujitsu has because it's mostly done on the ground. That's when I was like, the animal flow, the bear crawls, the rolls, the gator this, the gator that. That's when I was like, okay, there's jujitsu, there's the sport of jujitsu, but there's just also like movement in its broadest form. And because I'm a trainer and it's my job, I eventually formed a certain hierarchy of movement. And the first one would be like what I like to call regrounding, where people that want to get back into shape, if we really talking about shape, not aesthetic form and getting a six pack, but just getting healthy movement back in the body, they should be able to go to the ground and up from the ground easily, fluidly, a certain amount of repetition without being winded. The first step is like a baby. When a baby's born, put him on his back, he starts to roll, he goes on his our four legs, crawls around, and then eventually goes into a squat and stands up. Like that's the first part of movement. The second part of movement is just running around, jumping, hanging, like Homo sapien movement. Right after that, we have martial arts or like dealing with somebody else, like the reactiveness that martial arts and the self-defense has. After that, we have lifting, all forms of lifting, whether it be weightlifting, kettlebell, mace, even throwing a ball could be considered a lifting. And then finally, flow or dance or true improvisation. Try to mix everything together. And that's where the mace and the kettlebell changed a little bit my perspective on fitness. It wasn't so much about how much can you lift or how many reps can you do. It was, could you play with a weight without like pulling your back? Are you able to flip the kettlebell? Are you able to swing the mace and then maybe add a lunge here or a squat there and stay coordinated? That's the I think that's the peak of all movement. It's to be able to coordinate, improvise, and flow. Flow is the name of the game.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think and I think for everyone who, they're like, oh, I have to go to the gym. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like you're not looking at this the right way. Like, fall
Mhm.
in love with just moving and don't be shy. And I think sometimes we're shy to be beginners at something,
Mhm.
right? Like, you turned me on to the mace. I got two of
Yeah.
them right over there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, absolutely. And at first I didn't get it. I didn't get it until And one thing you kept telling me is like, I want the big one. You're like, no, you don't. You want the little one. I'm like, no, I want the big one. You know, because my ego is like, I don't want the little one. I want the big one. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, but you won't flow with the big one. You got to start with the little one. And then once your flow is really strong, it'll feel effortless with the bigger one.
Yeah.
But as long as you're using too much strength, you won't really understand the purpose of this tool. Right. And so I think I ordered like a 10-pound one and it was going pretty well. And then I ordered a 7-pound one. And that is by far my favorite tool in the bag
Mhm.
right now, because I can do, you know, some of the stuff that you show me, but I can also just shadow box with a mace, right?
Mhm.
Like I have one of these bob dudes, the big bob guys,
Yeah.
that you can hit. And I just started using the mace and just using it as a striking tool,
Yeah.
right? And using technique, but then also just seeing like, hey, I know how to strike. Let's see what comes out. Right. And suddenly I'm using this mace and trying all these different angles. And but the next day, my back, my arms, I just felt like another level of workout happened, but I
Yeah.
wasn't working out. I was
Playing.
just playing with
Yeah.
this mace, striking with my instincts. I was flowing with this tool, but because of the extra weight resistance that it added, I was also getting an amazing workout. And I think
Yeah.
that's where martial arts can trick you into get into really good shape sometimes. Like
Yeah.
when
Because
Muay
it's a
Thai, when I started Muay Thai, I was very skinny, not much muscle going on. And then 3 months later, I remember just looking in the mirror and be like, wait, what happened? But that wasn't the purpose. The reason I was doing Muay Thai was because I loved it, because I
yeah.
loved going to the gym. I loved striking. I loved learning. I loved the interaction with my teammates. I loved the intensity of it. Yeah, there was a lot of push ups and stuff in the classes, and I was doing those, but it never felt like I'm doing this because I want to look ripped. It was all just because I want to be better. I want to be stronger. I want to be
Yeah.
faster. And then I look in the mirror and like, okay, that doesn't suck. You know what I mean? Like,
It's like add
okay,
on.
I can take that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But, and I think that so many people go to the gym either to lose weight or to look ripped, or they keep it at this level here instead of just like, hey, go all the way down to the primal need to move.
Mhm.
Find that passion for moving, whatever it is that turns you on, but find something that you're passionate about moving with, and you won't have to think about the rest. You won't have to
Yeah.
think about eating well because you will eat well. You won't have to think about drinking enough water because you just will, because you know that it's part of the process.
Yeah.
You mentioned it very early on, holistic, right? Having a holistic lifestyle. It's not making difficult choices. It's more about just falling in love with the lifestyle that you live so that you don't even have
Yeah.
to think about making that choice. You know, like even me, like now, if I don't eat well, immediately feel like, ugh, that was disappointing, you know?
Yeah.
And
I guess
then,
sometimes, sorry, yeah, I guess sometimes people just forget, because they're being eating crap food or not moving for so long, they just forget how good they could feel. A lot of people are like, oh, I have back pain. When's the last time you bend your back and arch your back the other way? And people forget. People
yeah.
forget the joy of just dancing for an hour with your girlfriend or your kids. And oh, my back feels better the next day because you drain the blood, you work the muscle a little bit, and that's all it is.
Yeah. And I think, and as I say that, I do want to catch myself and say this, that because I've spoken to a few people about this, is that it's easy for me and you to sit here and be like, people just need to move. People just need to eat well. Well, guess what? A lot of people don't know how,
Yeah.
right? And that's something that we underestimate, is that there's a lack of education available, because kids are growing up in schools not being taught how to eat well, not being taught how to move, right? They're still stuck in this strange framework of education. So that leads to adults. So unless you go out and find it yourself, no one's going to come over and be like, here, here's how you do it. You know, you really have to go out. But that said, I think more and more, especially after this pandemic, there's so many people online right now offering amazing information and knowledge and sharing what they know.
Yeah.
So if you have any interest whatsoever in learning how to move, learning how to eat, and just learning how to find that passion for movement, make an effort, find those resources, you being, I think, one of the great resources. And I'll make sure that people have all your contact information in the show notes. um, because every day, man, I get on Instagram and there you are saying something positive, showing me something about movement, freaking jumping in a frozen lake.
Yeah, that was sick. That's
Crazy bastard. Because I watch all your videos, but that one I was like, oh, this is the first time I see you suffer. Like you
yeah.
were like,
It
normally you
was
make it look easy, but this
it
time I
was the
was like,
most intense.
whoo, okay, here we go. And I'm like I'm in California, so that's never gonna happen. But
You're gonna
But
come back one day.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah, in the summertime, I'm not going back to London.
Ah.
Nah, we'll see, we'll see. But no, but honestly, and I think and I think that's for me. We have to wrap this up, but
Yeah.
for me, I just want to shout out for that. I think not only are you a great trainer, not only are you a great martial artist, but I think that, the reason you and I have been connected for so long is just because of the positivity you bring to all of it, right? You make it seem like something that I want to do. Like you play with a mace. And I think, and that's something we talked about really early on about, especially this podcast and stuff like that. He's like, man, I just want people to know that there's another side of me because all they see are like muscles and kettlebells and maces and it's intimidating.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people avoid training with you because they think they're going to get smashed.
Yeah.
But it's the opposite, man. Like you're one of the softest, most approachable people once you allow, and the same way that where someone's coming from. It's not like I'm not going to start you doing the crazy stuff. We're going to start slow
Mhm.
and we're going to build and we'll get you there. But I think people need to always scratch a little deeper before you judge who someone is or what they're about, right?
Yeah. Don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
a lot of time I had this discussion with another friend the other day. Is like, he's like, why is your nickname Max Powers? Because Powers is not my real last name. Max is my first name. And he sort of made me think, and he almost said it for me. I didn't even say it, but he said, you're a stand. You're like a stand for what people can become, right? So I show up at my max power stuff. I try to keep fit. I try to keep intelligent. I try to keep my spirits up and my emotions level. And it's like, I my name Max Powers is to inspire people to reach their own max powers, and
Yeah.
that's I think that's my purpose in life. When I was younger, at a certain point, I was talking with one of my friends, a friend of my mom's, and he's like this businessman, pretty rich, and he was like, I was like, what should I do? Like, what kind of job? And he looked at me and he says, you should be a trainer. And it slowly dawned on me, and I became a trainer, and it just feels so right. That's I think that's why I'm here on this planet, is to share my joy for fitness, but also elevate people so they could be their fittest, so then they could be their mental fittest and then their emotional fittest, and just evolve or ascend.
Ascend. Yes, we're all seeking ascension. All right, brother. Let's wrap this up. So I'll make sure to get everyone connected with all your stuff, Facebook, Instagram, all the things. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today. This was awesome. We're definitely going to do a part 2 at some point because I feel
Yeah, I'm
like we
down.
just scratched the surface. So yeah, peace, brother, and I'll talk to you soon.
Blessings, FLŌ Tribe. Go.